Hello, everyone. Good to see you all again. Waiting until Geshe will join us, we can start. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all again. Waiting until Geshe will join us. Okay. Hi, Geshe. Great to see you again live. So welcome, everyone. I want to, first of all, of course, to welcome you all. And to remind everyone that all the teaching that we're getting here and all the activity of Dharma Friends of Israel is done voluntary, of course, by our teachers and by all the staff. And if you want to support it, and to support, of course, also other people to be able to get those teachings in the future. So you have the option to support the activity in Dharma Friends of Dharma Friends of Israel, and also, of course, the teachers using the PayPal link. If you have questions regarding the lesson, the material, you can send them to me. I posted also my email in the chat. That's it. Have a great week and great teachings. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Shir. Welcome back. Great. All right, so we'll start as usual with a brief meditation to set the right kind of motivation. So let's start with breathing meditation for a short time. About a minute of breathing meditation. And now to fully benefit from Chandraskirti's wisdom, let's start with the visualization of the Buddha in the space in front of us, who's surrounded by all the great beings of the different traditions, bodhisattvas, arhats, realized masters of the Nalanda tradition, and so forth. And remember that they're all inseparable from your lama or your lamas. And surrounding this source of inspiration, surrounding us, are all sentient beings. With all their problems, their fears, depression, sadness, and so forth. But also with their limited happiness and their fragile mind and body, prone to experience problems at any time. And then remember that in that way, with all their sufferings and limitations, they're just like us. And what all sentient beings have in common is the wish to be happy, not to suffer. And since it's our self-cherishing attitude that is one of the main causes for all suffering, let's exchange our self-concern for concern for all sentient beings. Through first generating deep affection, called affectionate love, a mind that considers sentient beings endearing with all their faults and shortcomings. Generate a feeling of genuine closeness towards all sentient beings. And from within that affection, now generate great compassion. That is the wish, the sincere aspiration. May all sentient beings be free from all sufferings, all limitations. And may I be able to protect them from their sufferings and limitations. Try to really feel that from the depth of your heart. And then your great compassion then transforms and gives rise to the special attitude, the altruistic attitude, which is the determination. I will do all I can with all my effort and my time to protect sentient beings from suffering, its causes, and all their limitations. I will not give up, no matter how long it takes. Yet since I'm only able to realistically be of benefit to sentient beings in the best way, if I become a Buddha myself, if I attain enlightenment, let's therefore generate Bodhichitta, a mind that is determined to attain enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. And again, feel that strong determination to become enlightened. And then, without letting go of that mind, let's recite the prayers together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings never be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then directed at front visualization, Buddhas and the other master, the Buddha and the other masters surrounding him. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. Okay, great. Well, having set our motivation again for this coming week, last time I talked about, well, the practice of empathy, especially when we're with other people. Well, of course, in connection to what Jada Rinpoche said about 2 weeks ago, he spoke in his, well, when he answered questions during the last session, he very much emphasized the importance of not just praying, not just, well, reciting these prayers as we just did and doing the meditation to generate the right kind of motivation for all sentient beings, but to actually put this into practice in our encounter with others. So Holiness the Dalai Lama spoke about it a few lessons ago. I don't remember it exactly. No, it was the last time. It was the event before that when he said, well, we Tibetans, we like to pray for all sentient beings, but then just praying for them is not enough. And it's not just true for Tibetans, it's for all of us. It becomes like a routine. We go through the notions of meditating, of reciting the prayers, but it's so important that there's a real feeling, that it's sincere. And the meditation masters, they always talk about this feeling, like you're really moved from deep within. And then, of course, in everyday situations, as Jada Rinpoche put it, your neighbors, your friends, your family, the people you're in touch with, the people you meet on a daily basis, they're the people you can practice with. They're the best objects for your practice. They're the ones that take you to enlightenment. As it's said in the scriptures, well, we need Buddhas and we need sentient beings. Both of them are equally important for us to transform our mind, to develop qualities that we're still lacking. And so in our interaction with other people in particular, so for this week again, and if you were present when His Holiness gave the teachings on April 7th, well, you received not the Bodhisattva vow. It wasn't the Bodhisattva vow His Holiness gave. His Holiness gives the ritual for generating Bodhichitta. It's not necessary to go through a ritual, but in the scriptures it says, well, you can use, for instance, the prayer of refuge, Bodhichitta, as we've done at the beginning of this lesson or this class. And His Holiness does a slightly longer version of that you repeat 3 times, which is really taking refuge, rejoicing in the merit, and then basically generating bodhicitta. So with this ritual, you generate the mind of enlightenment. And His Holiness does it again and again and again. And some of you may have actually generated the mind of enlightenment, may already be bodhisattvas, but I guess for most of us, it's probably, well, it's just going through emotions, like going through kind of like not having the mind of enlightenment. I don't want to use the word pretending to have it. So that's a very negative term, but like kind of going through the motions in the sense of just generating it, even if it's not the real mind, even if it's not what they call uncontrived bodhicitta. There's this distinction between contrived, which is kind of means artificial in the sense that it requires some effort. You really need to kind of requires, generate some, kind of remind yourself of why it's necessary, like make an effort to allow for that mind to arise. And that's kind of an artificial version. The real version of the mind of enlightenment, the uncontrived, the actual mind of enlightenment, arises spontaneously. But for anything to arise spontaneously, well, you need to fast. Well, unless you've already had a particular mind since beginning this time, well, then you don't need to make an effort. It just arises spontaneously, such as the afflictive emotions. But for minds such as great compassion, bodhicitta, and so forth, well, it takes some effort. It takes familiarity until eventually it becomes second nature. Okay, so it becomes spontaneous. But for that spontaneity to take place, for that mind to arise spontaneously and be there at all times, well, if not actively be there, but at least influence our daily activities, we need to generate again and again and again. And as Homer said it so beautifully, it's all bodhicitta. It helps us in our daily life. It helps us to become enlightened. It helps ourselves. It helps others. It helps in the short term. It helps in the long term. So again, to be a student of His Holiness, a follower, a disciple, or just someone who's interested in what His Holiness says or teaches, well, let's do exactly that. All right. And again, that's for you to continue for this coming week, in particular in your interaction with other people. So to be with another person, to be there fully, to pay attention to their needs, to listen. Okay, so to listen when it's appropriate. It's not that easy. Sometimes we'd rather like to talk about our own issues, but to be there with another person, to be there fully focused, to listen as much as we can, of course, respond when it's necessary. But in general, to put ourselves into the other person, to put their needs before our own. So that would be, again, part of this practice. And of course, in the morning, if you have the time, if you have the interest to do the meditation, again, as Jadu Rinpoche recommended for generating bodhicitta, to put the two together. Well, recommended in the sense of someone asking how you put the two traditions or the two techniques together. The 7-point instruction on generating bodhicitta, the 6 causes and 1 effect, starting with remembering all sentient beings, or becoming aware of the fact that all sentient beings have at some point been really close to us, have been our mother, and of course equalizing and exchanging self with others. Those two, combining those two before generating affectionate love, great compassion, the way we've been doing this as part of setting the right motivation. So to remember those, go through those, equalizing and exchanging self with others, very important. And then if you can, it's a little harder for us with rebirth, etc., having a difficult time with understanding or believing at least in rebirth or reincarnation. Well, to the degree you can, generate a sense of all sentient beings have at some point been extremely kind to us and so forth. Until then, you're able to generate that closeness, that affectionate kind of love towards all sentient beings and so forth, until the mind of enlightenment. And then hopefully this accompanies you throughout the day. All right, so that's the aspect, so important, should be in the center of our lives. But of course, as the Holiness also stresses a lot, we need wisdom. We need an understanding of reality. And for that, well, one of the most helpful texts is the one we're studying right now. And I've been receiving some questions, and I want to go through at least 1 or 2 of them. I think this is the time to do so, to go through one. It's all in connection to what we've been doing. I'm just looking for it right now. It all connects to the Chitta Mantra school. First question, yes. So it's about, someone writes that they've observed the imprints in the store consciousness. Well, of course, there is no foundation consciousness in that sense. But if we just kind of become familiar with the Chitta Mantra school, although that's being refuted, but there's certain ideas we maintain, certain ideas we don't negate, even when we move on to the Prasangika view, when we study and practice, meditate on the Prasangika Madhyamika view. But the idea, of course, that there are imprints left on our mind. That is an important idea. And here the person writes, well, it seems that because of the unpleasant experiences I'm imprinted, were not released at the time through talking, writing, drawing, or other creative means, they stick like glue in memory. I don't think it's really, I mean, like that, they stick in our memory. They don't stick in our memory as such. It's more, and also the way it's put here, it seems like it's something very concrete, that it's like sticking in our mind. Well, that kind of gives the sense that the mind is something very concrete, well, something physical. And of course, that's not what it is. But in a way, you could say, well, metaphorically, okay, so they stick whatever actions we accumulated in the past, they're still with us. That's totally the case, in that whatever mental actions we perform, if you like, so the mind thinking, planning, judging, and so forth, these mental actions, they remain with the mind. So whether you call it imprints, you call it some potency, but there's some residue left with the mind. That's hard to understand. So here it says that you may become it seems to me the imprinter, they stick like glue. Okay. Oh, yes. So this person says, well, arising with the interest to observe them, in the very first sentence, which I didn't read previously, but this person talks about the wish to observe them. Well, these imprints we cannot observe. They're too subtle. We don't perceive these imprints in our own mind. A Buddha would perceive them, and also certain lamas with certain clairvoyant abilities, they can know what kind of imprints we have, in what form they could ripen, and sometimes give us certain practices to possibly avoid the ripening of a very negative karma that could be a huge obstacle, and so forth. In general, I think what's important to understand is that although every action leaves a residue in the mind called imprint, these imprints are constantly changing. So it's not like we're stuck with these little dots there and they're totally like unchanging and permanent and what have you. No, they're actually changing all the time. And the good thing about this is that, especially the residues, if you like, the imprints that actually harm us, well, we can purify them. And making an effort in our daily life to accumulate, well, the way I talked about generating the mind of enlightenment, and something as wholeness, of course, also says over and over again, generating the mind of enlightenment is the most powerful means to purify negative karma. So whatever negative imprints were left on the mind, if you generate bodhicitta again and again, that will automatically take care of this process of purification of hindrances on the mind. So we can make changes, but it's too hidden to us. These phenomena, these imprints are not obvious, and so we want, well, maybe through more mindfulness, etc., you'll come to such a point when you have these what are called clairvoyant abilities, you can, well, become aware of your own imprints, but that's long from now. So you have to be a really advanced practitioner with a very advanced level of concentration. But in the meantime, just to be on the safe side, to observe the law of karma and be aware what we feed into our mind, in the sense like what thoughts we allow to happen, how long we allow these thoughts to remain, versus applying an antidote when we're angry, when we're aggressive, and so forth, when there's jealousy, envy, etc. And then the person says, well, it seems that they slowly surface if a similar experience triggers them for something like that, but I think I heard you say they slowly stop surfacing if a similar experience triggers them 3 or 4 times. This is just saying if it's a karmic imprint, if a karmic imprint was left on the mind and this ripens in the form of an experience, well, that particular karmic imprint can no longer ripen again. Some karmic imprints can ripen in the form of 3 or 4 experiences, or more or less. It always depends on the strength of a particular imprint that, well, exists in the form of a karmic imprint such that it ripens in the form of an experience. And so, as I said, it can be 3 times, 4 times, and then the karma is exhausted. But we have plenty of other ones. So we continuously accumulate new types of karma. And so it's not like we run out of experiences. So that's what I said, that's the good thing about any kind of negative experience. At least that particular karma cannot ripen in that experience again, unless we've, of course, accumulated more of that type of karma. And then we have the opportunity to purify through virtuous actions. Of course, there are other means as well, through the 4 powers of purification. But, well, as His Holiness says, just generating bodhicitta is so powerful. Then there was another question. Someone writes, it seems, and now we're moving more specifically towards the Chittamatra school. So what does this school say? What does this Chittamatra, the mind-only school, accept? They don't say there's only mind. That is very important, and we'll come to that a little later. They don't say there's only mind. But here this person says, all experience is karma. All experience is karma. All right, all experience is karma. Well, karmic experience, yes. Whether all experience is karma, that is debatable. And then goes on to say, but let's say just ordinary experiences, well, yes, as ordinary beings. Okay, so they are the result of certain karmic actions, because everything is consciousness. No, not everything is consciousness. Understand what the person is trying to say. Everything is in the nature of consciousness, is inseparable from consciousness. That I totally agree with, but that it is consciousness. Blue is not consciousness. A car is not consciousness, although it doesn't exist externally, but we don't say that is conscious. We don't say karma is consciousness. Karma can't exist unless there's consciousness. So they're strongly connected. And in the Chittamatra school, well, a car exists because there's the ripening of an imprint on the mind that leads to the appearance of the car. And since there's the appearance of the car and there is no contradiction in terms of, well, other experiences that we've had, other perceptions by the mind, we can say the car exists, just not as an external phenomena, basically as a mere appearance to the mind. But that's still a car, it's not a mind. So all experience is karma. Well, because everything is consciousness. No, not everything is consciousness. And karma is a specific type of dependent arising to consciousness. Well, karma is a specific type. Well, yes, it's a type of law of cause and effect. So therefore, it operates on the natural law, of the law of dependent arising, or on the concept, if you like, of dependent arising. Based on that, you have karma because, well, karmic causes give rise to karmic experiences, and they're therefore dependent on these karmic causes. All right. So it's a specific type of consciousness. Therefore, because everything is consciousness, it follows that all experience is karma. But again, not everything is consciousness, and all experience is karma ripening from karmic imprints. Well, even if phenomena existed externally, those mental experiences, ordinary ones, well, let's agree on them. Some people say not everything is karma, and it's very difficult, even as Homeless has said, but it's difficult to understand what really is and what isn't. I mean, of course, certain things is very easy to say not everything is karma. The fact that my mind changes from moment to moment, or the fact that there's impermanence, that's not karma. That just is. The fact that phenomena don't exist, well, in the Prasangika school, don't exist truly, that's not karma. But of course, our experiences they're related to consciousness. And so therefore, yes, in a way, I think what this person is saying, yeah, karma and consciousness are closely related. Everything comes from within in consciousness, and so our experiences, they relate to our mental actions, right? And mental actions give rise to actions of body and speech. And even though there's no external body and speech, I totally agree with you that even though they're not existing there, so we can say that basically, yes, all our experiences are the result of karmic actions in the past. So this person is actually asking, did I get this right? And so in response to that, I think the wording is a little tricky, but I would agree in general. All right, I hope this was not too confusing also for everyone else. But now let's go back to what we've been studying, the verses that we got to. We're still with the Chittamatra school, and we've had the Chittamatra school cites the analogy of the dream. Now, this dream example, of course, it was not just made up by someone, it was given by the Buddha himself. This is so ingenious that the Buddha gave different examples that could be used to explain also the Chittamatra school, or in our case, well, the Prasangika school, which we're basically studying. So according to the Chittamatra school, they use the example of the dream. That's verse 44. Yeah. No, sorry, it's not 44. Where did we get to? What is your analogy for this? Yeah, 48. Where's your analogy for this mind with no external reality? All right, so in the previous verses, saying that phenomena don't exist external to the mind, they're just in the nature of the mind. They're not mind, but they're inseparable from the mind. All right, so where's your analogy? Like a dream. Let's examine this. Since such a mind does not exist for me even in a dream, this analogy of yours has no validity. This is the Prasangika saying. So if you say it's like a dream, what do you mean with that? Well, basically it means, let me just look at it. Yeah. So basically it means, well, the way the Chittamatra thinks about it is like, well, you have a mind, there's the dream mind, that is truly there. There's a very real kind of dreaming mind. We can all agree that that's there. But what we dream about, that actually doesn't exist. So the example that is given in the commentaries is if you sleep in a tiny room, you sleep in this tiny room, and you dream about an elephant. Now, it seems to you that there's this elephant where you are right now. So where are you in this tiny room? But a large elephant wouldn't fit into this room. So it doesn't make sense that there's an elephant in the room. Therefore, they say, well, just like in this dream, you have, there's no external object. That's just an appearance to the mind. So, but if you deny external existence, you have to have the mind. The mind is real. Now, let me remind you how we get to this, how the Chittamatra school actually developed. This is so interesting because it is one of those schools that was taught by the Buddha. Because for some disciples, for some students, it was really helpful to learn these ideas, to become familiar with them as a type of stepping stone to make the mind more flexible. And then once they understood this particular school, this particular philosophy, and their minds had become more flexible, think of the mind similar to the body. You stretch it in certain ways. You do it once, you do it twice. Well, the third time you do it, it becomes easier, less effort, it requires less of an effort, and so forth. So in the same way, our mind, if you hear an idea for the first time, I mean, definitely remember when you heard about emptiness the first time, how much you really understood. Second time, third time, and so forth. It gets easier and easier as you continue. And so this is true for emptiness, the Prasangika school, yes, of course, but sometimes some of these ideas are so difficult, it's easier to go through the other schools and they just make the mind more flexible. You understand it better and better and better, and then eventually your mind is so flexible that understanding the Prasangika school requires very little effort. And how do we get to the Chittamatra school? Well, if you've actually followed this sequence, and if you didn't, not a big deal, but it's helpful to become, usually when we study, that's how we do it. We study the Vaibhashika less so, but the Satantrika, which are considered to be lower than the Chittamatra school in relation to the view that they set forth, the view of reality, well, we study at least the Satantrika school, and there what we learn is, well, the self as a controlling entity doesn't exist the way it appears. So definitely a form of core selflessness is introduced. The mind, its object, the nature of the mind, etc. But although that is suggested and that you need to have a mind for something to exist, but it's still only implied or indicated. Yes, you need the mind in terms of a definition that is given. Well, something can only exist if there's a mind to recognize it or a mind to realize it. All that is said, but at the same time, listening to the explanation, it seems to imply, but there's still this objective world out there. That's the way we look at it. And we're kind of slowly moving towards the importance of the mind, yes, but not letting go all the way of our sense of an objective world out there. And of course, introducing the mind to selflessness, etc. Yes, but not letting go of an inherent mind. And then if you then move on to the Chittamatra school, analyzing how does everything around us exist. If you think about well, material objects that are made of subtle particles, subatomic particles, atoms, and so forth, molecules, all these different these small particles. When you think about it, there's no essence to be found. So the Chittamatra school came to that conclusion. You don't find anything essential that can be called the table. It's just made of bits and pieces, atoms and quarks and what have you, that are not tables. So in the end, you don't find a table. And that non-findability that they discovered led them to the conclusion there's no external phenomena. There's no external phenomena. There's just mind. So according to his Holiness, well, um, quantum physicists, they have a similar explanation that there really is just mind. There's just the observer, and his Holiness has repeated this. And I don't know enough about quantum physics to say that quantum physicists are actually followers of the mind only school. I mean, well, at least their views match of all the school match mainly the mind only school, but of course, his Holiness knowledge, we can trust his knowledge of the Chittamatra school, the mind only school, and I guess also of the of quantum physics. So therefore, similar this idea, there's nothing out there. This is an incredibly helpful idea because it puts the focus on the mind, whereas previously it was much more on the objects of the mind, the objects of the senses in the Satantrika school, for instance, and of course in our daily life anyway. And so the focus is on the mind. However, since there's this need, because we're so used to just holding on to something concrete and truly there, the Chittamatra school makes the mind really, really, well, not solid in the sense it's still a non-physical entity, but makes me more concrete, or as an independent, makes it out to be this independent entity. All right, so that truly exists, but its objects don't. Okay, and this is the debate going on now here in the Prasangika school, because we're learning the Chittamatra school only to then move on to the Prasangika school and see, going through the motions, like going through this step by step. And if you study this in more detail, for instance, while we debated this for a few weeks, depending on how extensive this topic was, for a few months, we study a whole text just on the foundation consciousness by Lama Tsongkhapa. And so you really get into the school, your mind becomes more flexible through this. And then, of course, with a study of a text like this, we're then moving on to the Prasangika school. Okay, now this is also happening here in verse 48. The Chittamatra school, giving the example of the dream, what is the response by the Prasangika? Since such a mind does not exist for me, even in a dream, this analogy of yours has no validity. So such a mind, such an inherent mind that you set forth as the dream mind, for me as a Prasangika fellow, as a fellow of the Prasangika school, does not exist for me. Even in a dream, there's no truly existent mind. There's no truly existent object. Yes, on that we agree. The Chittamatra say there's no inherently existent external object. Well, simply because there's no external object. They still believe, of course, in the non-external colors and shapes, etc., that are just appearing to the mind. But as of external existence, so like in a dream, there is no elephant in a dream. Okay, there's no external table in the wake state. So taking the example of the dream, just as in a dream there is no elephant, there's a dream elephant, but there's no elephant in the dream. A dream elephant is just that appearance to the mind. That exists, just that appearance exists. But the elephant itself, there's no elephant in that room where you dream in, so there's no elephant in the dream. And that is similar to external existence. There's no external existence. There's only the mind perceiving it, but that exists truly. But the Prasangika school says that not just the external object doesn't exist inherently. There's no inherently existent object, but even the mind doesn't exist that way. So your analogy doesn't work. It doesn't explain. It doesn't work to set forth the true existence, the inherent existence of the mind, and the lack of external existence of the objects of the mind. All right. So why? Well, and then it's explained. For instance, and then in verse 49, if you say now, you Chittamatra person, so you're insisting, this is an example that works, but if you say that the mind must exist because we remember our dream, they say the mind is truly there, it's really there. Well, because remember our dream, when we wake up, well, the same must be true of external objects. We also remember the external objects. Like if we dream of an external elephant, well, remember that. And according to your logic, that would then mean if you remember the dream, the dreaming mind, and therefore that exists truly, well, you remember external objects, then they have to exist truly. They must exist, which you deny. For just as you can recall in terms of I dreamed this, similar recollections exist for external objects as well, right? So makes sense, verse 49. Okay, if you remember the dream mind and therefore reason that the dream mind exists truly, well, I reason you remember the external objects, then they have to exist truly as well. All right. Then it goes on to say, 50, verse 50. Well, you may say, and now the Chittamatrans, you may respond, and here whether this debate took place or not is hard to say, but it makes sense that, of course, if you're like a Chittamatra person, you try to reason, you try to hold on to this view. We do that all the time. If we learn about emptiness, there's also the mind that is used to seeing things as inherently existent. And there's this thought, well, but it doesn't make sense because things appear that way. And then there's the logic. So in that way, it could also be like an internal struggle, kind of reflecting that. One mind tending towards the Chittamatra, then the other mind tending towards the Prasangika, as of learning about the Prasangika. Or here it could be actual two people, but that's this debate going on. And of course, you're aware of the debate in Buddhism that plays, especially in the Nalanda tradition, plays such a big role in learning a subject. And so this reflects the actual two people meeting and exchanging their ideas, right? So we can always learn from others. Two minds is always better than one. So having that intellectual exchange, but also internally, it reflects also that. On one hand, I feel it's like this. On another hand, I feel it's like that. Okay, so if you're really familiar with the Chittamatra school and you think along those lines, and then here from the Prasangika school, and that also makes sense, there may actually be this exchange. So anyway, whichever way is here, it seems to be like just another person. So you may say, since there's no visual cognition in sleep, no external object is seen, and thus mental cognition alone exists. So what is their argument? Well, that's 50. Yeah. What's the arguments? Well, if things existed externally, there would be sense consciousnesses. Okay. So in a dream, there's no eye consciousness. So therefore, there's no sense consciousnesses. In a dream, there is no sense consciousnesses such as eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so forth. So just as in a dream, things cannot exist externally because there's no sense consciousness, well, and there's therefore only the mental cognition or mental awareness, mental consciousness. Likewise, this is true for the awakened state. Okay, there's only mental consciousness. So therefore, when we awake, it's the same. There's no sense consciousnesses, the Chitta Matras say. Well, they do kind of talk about sense consciousnesses, but they're not really sense consciousnesses in the classical sense, not in the sense that the Prasangika school would say you need an external sense basis, like a sense faculty, such as the ear, the eye sense faculty, like the retina and the parts of the brain that are responsible for seeing an object, the visual cortex and so forth. So none of those are required in the Chitta Matra school. So they still talk about an eye consciousness if it only perceives shape and color, but really it's a type of mental consciousness if you check, because you don't need an external object. What is an eye consciousness? An eye consciousness, really in the classic sense, as it's explained by those schools that accept phenomena existing external to the mind, they say you need a visual object outside of your mind, an external visual object. You need a sense faculty, a sense power, if you like, some on a physical level. You need functioning eyes and so forth. And then when they come together and a previous moment of awareness had taken place, well, then a moment later, you can have an eye consciousness perceiving shape and color. In the Chitta Matra school, although they still say, well, there is an eye consciousness, but that's not the classic eye consciousness. So their reason, just like in the dream, when there is a dream eye consciousness, that word is actually used, a dream eye consciousness, which may just perceive shape and color, but actually in actuality, it's just from that point of view, we call it that, but it's really just a mental mind, a mental awareness. And so therefore there's no external objects. Well, the same is true in daily life. That's how they argue here. And then in 51, we can go quite quickly through these verses. They're not that difficult to understand. Then in response to that, the Prasangika school says, well, just as for you, no external realities are born in a dream, no mental cognitions are born either. So just as you say, external realities do not come into existence, or not inherently coming into existence because they don't exist. Well, for us, mental cognitions are not inherently, do not inherently arise either, because inherently means independently. Mental cognitions, if they existed inherently, well, that would mean they existed independently. But you need at least, well, these three factors. In the case of an eye consciousness, well, the Prasangika school, of course, accepts sense consciousnesses. But even if you just talk about an eye consciousness in the sense as the Chitta Matra school talks about it, it's still dependent on many factors, right? The eyes, even though the eyes are just mere appearances, they're objects, and a mind, well, they're all fictitious. They're all, the word here that Thupten Jima uses, fictitious, they're all folds, really. And the Tibetan word is folds, as in like, they don't exist in the way in which they appear. So the Chitta Matra, the Prasangika school says, well, we don't say, no, we agree with you, there are no inherently existent external phenomena. They do accept, of course, the Prasangika school says that there are external phenomena, but they don't exist inherently. The Chitta Matra school says, yes, there are no inherently existent external phenomena, not because they deny inherent existence, but because they deny external phenomena. So they both agree that there are no inherently existent external realities, just for different reasons. But of course, the Prasangika school says even the mind can't exist inherently, because that means it exists independently. And the mind still needs other factors to arise. Right? So that's what it says in verse 51. It needs other factors of perception. So the eyes, their object, and the mind engendered by them, that arises from them. And they're all fictitious. So they're all fictitious in that they don't exist the way they appear as inherently existent. So they can't exist inherently because they exist in dependence. And then for the ears and the rest too, for these other awarenesses, the Prasangika say, these three factors lack inherent birth. They don't arise inherently. And as in dreams, and here, this is how the Prasangika school now uses the dream example. That's why I'm saying the Buddha was ingenious. He used the same example, explained the Chitta Mantra on one hand and the Prasangika on the other hand. So both examples can be used, but of course they have to be interpreted slightly differently. And that's the debate between the two of them here. When we've heard already the interpretation of the Chitta Mantra school, well, now Chandrakirti introduces the idea how the dream example works in the Prasangika school. So for the ears and the rest too, these three factors lack inherent birth. So the eye sense faculty, the object, and the mind itself, well, they don't arise inherently. They lack inherent existence. They don't arise independently or inherently. And as in dreams, here too in the waking state, phenomena are false, and the mind has no inherent existence. There are no inherent objects of experiences, and no inherent objects of experience, and no inherent senses either. So here it just says no, 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 but that's because you don't have to say inherent again and again and again. You know, it's all about inherent existence. Like in the Heart Sutras, no eye, no ear, no nose. Oh yeah, like of course we know that doesn't mean there's nothing there. It's implied here, of course, we're talking about no inherent existence. So therefore, the Prasangika school, and here Chandrakirti, of course, arguing for the Prasangika school, says, well, things don't exist neither in a dream nor in a wake state. They don't exist inherently. They appear that way, but they don't exist in that way. And then it says in 52 and 53 really, it says how this analogy works for the Prasangika school. So 52 and 53 really, well 53 in particular. So here, just as with the waking state, it's really 53 that explains how the analogy works in the Prasangika school. So having explained that, whether you're dreaming or not dreaming, object or mind, nothing exists inherently. And how does the dream example work? Well, just as with a waking state, the three factors of dream exist until woken up. Upon rousing, the three become no more. So it is for those awakened from the sleep of delusion. So in other words, while we're dreams, the dream state is used to explain our situation right now. Whereas a Buddha is someone who's awakened. Okay, so the example is very differently used, is used quite differently from the Chitta Mantra school. We talk about the Buddha as the enlightened one, but really the word enlightenment literally means awakened one. And the Buddha is someone who's woken up, understanding that phenomena do not exist the way they appear. All right. So here, just as with the waking state is like the state of a Buddha. The three factors of dream exist until woken up. So there's a sense they exist inherently to the mind. They appear to exist. We always have the appearance of inherent existence until we become a Buddha. Even arhats still have that appearance. So until woken up for the mind in terms of the appearance, these factors, eyes, their objects, the mind itself, they exist truly, they exist inherently. Until woken up. Upon rousing, upon attaining the state of a Buddha, the three become no more inherently existent. There's, of course, no perception of them existing inherently, but also no appearance. once you become a Buddha, you're free from any wrong appearance, well, any wrong apprehension or wrong perception anyway, but more importantly, free from any wrong appearance. So it is for those awakened from the sleep of delusion. So they're awake from the sleep of delusion. Now, of course, here there's a distinction between an arhat and a Buddha. And many of you are aware of that, but just to remind you, if you're not aware of it or if you've forgotten, that an arhat has removed ignorance, of course, has removed the wrong apprehension of reality, has removed that mind that misperceives objects, but objects still appear as if inherently existent to the mind, to the ordinary mind, not to the direct perception of emptiness. Of course, there only emptiness appears and there's no mistaken appearance of inherent existence. But to all the other minds, to a sense consciousness of an arhat, to the mental consciousness of an arhat, anything other than emptiness, when it is perceived, when it appears, any conventional truth that appears to the mind always appears to exist inherently. And only a Buddha has awoken from that wrong appearance. So therefore, the dream example is used to describe us as sentient beings versus someone waking up being a Buddha, or describing yourself existing now and then your awakened state when you're a Buddha in the future. Okay, so that's verse 53. This is how this verse is explained. So I hope it's all right that I'm going quite quickly, but there's no point in explaining much when it's pretty straightforward. So before I continue with verse 54, now just quickly to summarize, we've heard that according to the Chittamatra school that talks about lack of external phenomena, in what context, how did we get to the Chittamatra school? We actually got to the Chittamatra school in the context of explaining cause and effect, where you find some followers, at least of the Chittamatra school, the Chittamatra school following scripture. These particular Chittamatrans, or followers of the mind-only school, believe that there is a foundational consciousness or a store consciousness where all the imprints are left. Because otherwise, how do you carry on these karmic imprints? And of course, we heard from the Prasangika school, it's not necessary to have that kind of store consciousness. And it's in that context then that the Chittamatra school was explained. Well, saying there's the store consciousness, plus there's no external phenomena, there's only mind. And of course, the Prasangika school then asking, what is the example you give? I mean, the Buddha has given plenty of examples to explain these difficult ideas. What is the example that you use? The dream example the Buddha has also given to the Prasangika school, but first the Chittamatra school explains how they use this dream example, and in response to that, the Prasangika school says, no, but the way you explain it doesn't make sense. And in response, first refutes the Chittamatra view, the way I just explained, and we'll continue with this. And then thereafter explains the interpretation of the same example from the Prasangika school point of view. Now there's a second analogy, and this analogy you're already familiar with. It is the analogy of seeing falling hair, this floater, this disease that was mentioned as part of describing the two truth, conventional and ultimate truth. So in this context, here it says in verse 54, now the Chittamatra moves on to another example. They say, oh, right, we believe that we can prove, basically, we believe that phenomena don't exist externally because there's this particular example. It's quite interesting the way this example is used. So the cognition of one suffering from defective sight, that disease where you see falling hair, perceives floating hair. Well, really, it's better to say floating hair, because like this falling hair seems like it's just like spaghetti is falling down, but it's really like the disease is really just floating around. So perceives floating hair because of this malady, because of this disease. For such cognition, both floating hair and its perception are true. For those who have clear sight, those two things, both these things are false. Okay, so What do they say? The Chittamatrans would say that, well, the object in the example of the falling hairs, it's obvious the object doesn't exist, but the mind perceiving it exists, right? So in a sense, yeah, well, they can use they use this example effectively because we have examples where all sorts of things appear to the mind. The mind exists, but the objects that the mind perceives don't exist. Okay, so we know from everyday life, and we understand, well, the perception is there, but the object is not there. The perception of floating hair, that exists, but floating hair doesn't exist. And so that's their argument. They say, well, an object doesn't have to exist for a mind to perceive it. So it doesn't have to exist externally. It appears that way. But it can still be known, the appearance can still be known. However, externally, it doesn't exist, just as the floating hair. And so we can come to understand that for such cognition, both floating hair and its perception are true for the sick person. For those who have clear sight, both these things are false. All right, so this is 54. And then 56, now it's rejected. This is now, wait, is it 56 already? I'm getting confused here. If cognate, oh, it's 54. Yes, and then 56. Oh yeah. Now 56 is the it's the Prasangika school responding. If, according to you, again, it's this idea. All right, so you're insisting that the mind, here cognition is just the word that is used. Actually, it's consciousness. I would translate it with the word consciousness, lo, which in Tibetan is usually oftentimes is translated with consciousness. So consciousness or cognition as it's called here. So according to the Chittamatra school, cognition truly exists. Mind, consciousness truly exists, just its object doesn't, because it doesn't exist as an external phenomenon, at least. So the Prasangika schools say, well, come on, how can you have a cognition, a cognizing mind, without the cognized? Because we shouldn't forget, what does it mean to exist inherently? And I've said it before, is understanding that phenomena don't exist independently. Sorry, what does it mean to exist inherently? It means they exist independently. So inherent, I know it's like you say the word over and over again and you just hear that word and you're like, what does that actually mean? But just to remind you, it means independent because that's implied in the sense that if something exists, inherence has this meaning of nature. It's inherent, it's natural to something. It is just natural. We use this in everyday life, but we use words such as independent. We use that in everyday life. Israel is an independent country, but that doesn't mean in an absolute sense. It's not like Israel is absolutely independent. It's still dependent on the air and the weather and other things that are not Israel, and still it's dependent on those factors. So it's only in a relative way that we use the word independent. We also say things such as it's natural to this person. It's natural to water to be hot. As if you don't need anything else for water to be hot. It just is, right? It has that meaning. That's what it really, we have a sense. I've given you this example before. I don't remember whether it was in this class or in a different class, but remember I asked you before, well, if I haven't said it before, but I talked about water. Like water is not naturally hot. Okay, water is not naturally hot. It's not in the nature of water to be hot. Why? Because not every water comes with being warm, and you need something. You can have warm water, but you need external factors for the water to be warmed, to be heated, to be well, yeah, you need an external source, a heating source to warm water. But fire is naturally hot. It's naturally warm or naturally hot. So just as water is not naturally hot, but fire is naturally hot. So that seems to imply you don't need anything else. You just need water and then it's hot. Okay, you don't need some other source that heats up the should I say water now? No, you don't need fire. You don't need any other source, anything other than fire itself to be hot. So it's in the nature of fire to be hot. It's not in the nature of water to be hot. So saying that it's in the nature of fire to be hot means it just is hot. It just is. It doesn't need anything. And that means it's independently. It's independently fire. It's independently hot. Of course, it needs other things. It couldn't exist without oxygen, without other factors. So it needs so many other things to exist in order for it to be hot. So that heat is still dependent on other factors, which is why there's no absolute nature or inherent existence of anything. Okay, in the sense as just explained. So inherent means it just is. It doesn't need anything else to be that. If consciousness didn't need anything else to be consciousness, if it was inherently existent, if it was just in and of itself, which just means it doesn't need anything else, it itself is sufficient for it to exist, well, by implication, it means it's independently consciousness. It's in its nature. It's inherent in it's inherent. It's intrinsic. It's intrinsic to consciousness to be conscious. Well, then it doesn't need an object. You can have a mind that doesn't perceive anything, right? I mean, I'm not talking about a mind perceiving nothingness, which becomes an object, right? So the mind actually always a cognizing mind is a cognizing mind because it cognizes something. It's an eye consciousness because it perceives visual objects. So it's always dependent on something other than itself, which is why it's not intrinsic to the mind to be a mind. It cannot exist inherently as a mind. But the Chittamatra school says, well, it does. And this is where the debate comes from. So in verse 55, it says, if cognition exists without the cognized, one should see floating hair even without the malady, even without the sickness, even if you have no sickness. Well, you don't need an object to be a mind. Then anyone would see floating hair. That makes the eyes see such things. So the eye consciousness here, it sees those things. This is not the case. And so no such inherent cognition exists. It needs an object. Only if you need the activity of perception. Okay, the mind is not the activity of perceiving something. If you have the activity of perceiving an object, then you have a mind. So it's dependent on all these factors. And based on that, based on this object and the perception, we label mind. There's no inherent mind. But the Chittamatra likes to believe or holds on to the inherent existence of the mind. That there's a real mind, just external objects don't exist truly. All right. So this is a very powerful argument. And it actually, it goes into 56. I can just start. And so the Chittamatra school now says, well, you say, okay, you don't need an object. But we say, okay, if there were external phenomena and you needed an external object, we would agree with you. Yeah, there couldn't be an inherent mind because it would depend. But there's no external object. There's only imprints. There's only imprints. And therefore, it's because of this imprint. It's because of the imprint that there is the appearance of floating hair or not. So we're not saying that it's the cognized object, it's the imprint. Okay, so it takes us into this idea of imprints. We'll talk more about it next time. And then there's a whole discussion between them. So if you assert that such perceptions do not occur in those who have clear sight because the potentiality has not matured, it is not merely that the cognizable objects do not exist. So here the potentiality, that means the imprints, has not matured. Anyway, so this is what the Chittamatra school says. We believe that a perception does not occur for a person who's not sick. We say they're not sick just because the imprint for the floating hair hasn't ripened. For the floating hair hasn't ripened. So we say it's got nothing to do with floating hair or any object externally existent. It's all dependent on imprints. You have the imprints to have this experience. You have the experience, and then you're called a sick person because most other people don't have that imprint ripening. And if you don't have that kind of imprint, if it doesn't ripen, well, you don't have that disease. Therefore, it's all dependent on imprints. Okay. Now, the last verse is definitely not clear yet, needs to be clarified, but it goes into a whole different debate, and we've got time for that next time. All right, great. Now, we're done for today. So I apologize. I've gone through it quite quickly. You, of course, are welcome to ask and maybe ask to repeat something if it was too fast. But I thought it was straightforward enough and didn't require explanation. So, well, if that wasn't the case, I'll be happy to go over it again just briefly next time. But so please let Shir know if you need for some verse, maybe just please say something again about this verse or another one. And if that's not the case, I'll just continue next time because, well, we've been going with this text for almost 10 months now. And be nice to finish the 6th chapter within this year at least. So it seems Corona is around for a while. So we got still another maybe 10 months or something. So hopefully we can actually finish the text. But I need to speed up a little bit. All right, great. Let's do meditation on what we learned today. All right. Okay. And I totally forgot to speak slowly today because I was in a rush to finish those verses. So I apologize for that. Okay, great. Now let's start with some breathing meditation to let go any disruptive thoughts, to be focused on the analytical meditation. So let's now take the dream example. Think that you're dreaming about an elephant while sleeping in a tiny room. According to the Chitta Mantra school, just as there's no elephant in the dream, and only the dreaming mind exists, likewise in daily life, we're all just dreaming. Sometimes dreaming very different dreams from everyone else. And sometimes dreaming similar dreams. But if there are no external objects, the mind must exist truly, intrinsically. But if that were the case, the Prasangika argues, then the mind would exist independently. It would not depend on eyes and ears. It would not depend on colors, shapes, and sound. It would not depend on perceiving something. And therefore be this independent entity that doesn't require anything to exist. So Chandrakirti argues that the dream examples does serve as an example, but not to prove the non-external existence of phenomena and the inherent existence of the mind. Instead, as sentient beings, we're all dreaming the dream of ignorance. We perceive dream elephants or inherently existent elephants and believe them to exist. Just as we believe the person in the dream to be the actual person, we believe other people to exist inherently. The way they appear to our mind. We're fooled by the way phenomena appear to us. To our sense awarenesses, as well as to our mental consciousness. And it's only a Buddha who's like the person who's wakened up, who's no longer affected by these dreamlike appearances of inherent existence. And the Chitta Mantra again uses the example of floaters, an eye disease that causes the appearance of floating hair. Saying that just as the appearance doesn't exist, the floating hair doesn't exist, yet the mind perceiving it exists. Likewise, external phenomena are not existent, but the mind perceiving them truly exists. And in response, the Prasangika school argues, well then, if the mind exists in and of itself, independently, it doesn't depend on an illness for it to perceive floating hair. And even a person without this illness would have the appearance of floating hair, because the mind is totally independent of other phenomena, if it exists inherently. Yet our mind has no intrinsic, independent existence. According to the present ego school, it is merely labeled. On the basis of an object, and the perception of that object. It arises in dependence on external objects, visual, auditory, and so forth. And in dependence on the sense faculty. And it is based on the appearance of different objects and the mind engaging, perceiving those objects that we label mind. And now to conclude this meditation, whatever insight you've gained through this analysis, particularly with regard to the existence of the mind, apply a single point of concentration to focus on that insight, to allow for it to sink deeper into your mind, becoming part of your experience. And then let's dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated may become a cause for our own enlightenment. A way of deepening our understanding of the ultimate nature of all phenomena. In combination with our practice of compassion and bodhicitta. And due to the interdependence of all phenomena, may also have a positive impact on our environment, on the people we're connected to. May people who are ill, like Tali Lubin and others, recover very, very soon. And those who are fearful become strong and courageous. May those who suffer from addiction be able to overcome their sufferings. And of course, as Shantideva says, may all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, great. So please remember what to do for this coming week, and have a great week. Okay.
Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
You're welcome. All right. Good night.
Thank you,
Bye bye.
Geshe-ma. Good night.
Thank you.
Gute Nacht.
Good enough.
Good night.
Thank you, Dharma friends.
Thank you all. Bye bye. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.